In her parents' renovated Seattle home, a successful tech executive was about to overhear a devastating conversation. What started as a 40th anniversary celebration took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her family's true feelings. Jessica Williams wasn't your typical wealthy daughter. For 5 years, she had quietly supported her parents with $10,000 monthly, known for her generous heart. When she heard them laugh about her guilt money, she had no idea she was walking into a life-changing revelation. Jessica's response would shatter their comfortable arrangement. What began as family loyalty would become a battle for respect. The Williams family would never recover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jessica's hand traced the smooth marble countertop in her parents' kitchen, her fingers pausing at the subtle veining she'd never noticed before. The stone was cool beneath her touch, expensive, imported, perfect. Just like everything else in the house that had somehow transformed over the past year into something that belonged in a home design magazine, rather than the modest suburban Seattle neighborhood where she'd grown up. Beautiful work, isn't it? Bill Williams appeared beside his daughter, his voice carrying that familiar note of pride that used to make Jessica's chest swell with warmth. Now, looking at his weathered construction worker's hands, gesturing at countertops that cost more than most people's cars, she felt something else entirely, a nagging discomfort that had been growing stronger with each visit home. "It's gorgeous, Dad." The words came automatically, practiced. Jessica had been saying them for months now, about the hardwood floors, the crown molding, the designer light fixtures that cast everything in a warm golden glow. "You and Mom have really transformed this place." Bill's chest puffed out slightly. "Your mother's got quite the eye for design. Always has, you know. Just never had the means to show it before." Before. The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them acknowledged directly. Before Jessica's promotion to Senior Director of Product Development at her tech company. Before the salary that had made her parents' financial struggles disappear overnight. Before the monthly transfers that had become as routine as paying her own rent. "Speaking of your mother," Bill continued, glancing toward the living room where Nancy Williams was holding court near the new gas fireplace. "She's been talking about updating the kitchen next. The appliances are getting dated, and with everything else looking so fresh." Jessica nodded, though something twisted in her stomach. The kitchen appliances weren't dated. They were barely 3 years old, stainless steel models that had replaced the ones she'd grown up with. But she'd learned not to question these decisions. Her parents had sacrificed so much for her education, working extra shifts and skipping vacations so she could focus on her studies instead of worrying about student loans. The least she could do was help them enjoy the fruits of her success. "Whatever makes Mom happy," Jessica said, and meant it. Or thought she did. The anniversary party was in full swing around them. 40 years of marriage, her parents kept saying, as if the number itself was magical. Jessica watched relatives she rarely saw anymore sampling catered appetizers and admiring the renovations. Her Uncle Pete was examining the built-in entertainment center with obvious envy. Cousin Sarah kept taking photos of the dining room chandelier. Even Aunt Dorothy, usually so practical and no-nonsense, seemed impressed by the transformation. "Jess, honey, could you grab my reading glasses from the bedroom?" Nancy's voice carried across the room, sweet, but with that underlying expectation of immediate compliance that had shaped Jessica's childhood. "They're on the nightstand. I want to show Dorothy the paint samples for the kitchen." Jessica made her way through the familiar hallway, noting how the family photos had been reframed in expensive-looking silver frames. Her college graduation picture, her in cap and gown, beaming with pride, now sat in what looked like actual sterling silver. She paused at her parents' bedroom door, remembering when that hallway had been lined with hand-me-down furniture and discount store decorations. The transformation was remarkable, really. Her parents deserved nice things after decades of making do with less. She found the glasses easily enough, but as she turned to leave, voices from the living room drifted down the hallway. The acoustics in the old house had always been strange. Sound carried in unexpected ways, something she'd learned as a teenager when she discovered she could hear her parents' late-night financial discussions from her bedroom. "Really outdid yourself with this place, Nancy." That was Aunt Dorothy, her father's older sister. Must have cost a fortune. Oh, you know how it is. Nancy's laugh was light, dismissive. Jessica will pay for everything. She's so generous with her guilt money. Jessica's hand froze on the bedroom doorknob. Guilt money. The words hit her like cold water, sharp and sudden. She does seem to have quite the generous streak, Dorothy replied, her tone carefully neutral in that way that suggested she was fishing for more information. Generous. Bill's voice carried a note of amusement. That's one word for it. I think she still feels bad about us struggling when she was in college. Not that we're complaining, mind you. Kid works hard. Makes good money. Might as well put it to good use. And the kitchen renovation? Dorothy asked. Already priced it out, Nancy said, and Jessica could practically hear her mother's satisfied smile. $43,000 for everything we want. New cabinets, marble countertops to match what we did in here, top-of-the-line appliances. Jessica won't blink an eye. She never does. $43,000? Dorothy's voice held a note of surprise. Nancy, that's more than many people make in a year. Well, many people don't have daughters in tech, Bill chuckled. Besides, it's not like she has anything else to spend it on. No husband, no kids. At least this way, the money goes towards something that makes us happy. Jessica's breath caught in her chest. The glasses slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the hardwood floor. Another upgrade she'd unknowingly funded. She stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. Guilt money. As if her love, her desire to help the people who'd raised her, was nothing more than a transaction based on some perceived debt. You might want to be careful about depending on that too much. Dorothy's voice had shifted, taking on a warning tone that Jessica recognized from childhood. Aunt Dorothy had always been the family's unofficial voice of reason. Independence has its value, you know. Independence? Nancy's laugh was sharper now. Dorothy, we raised that girl. Fed her, clothed her, put her through school. If she wants to show her appreciation by helping us live a little better in our golden years, I don't see the problem. There's showing appreciation, and then there's... Dorothy's voice trailed off, but Jessica could fill in the blanks. Then there's taking advantage. Then there's entitlement. Then there's viewing your daughter as a personal ATM. Jessica bent slowly to retrieve the glasses, her hands trembling. Everything around her, the beautiful floors, the elegant bedroom furniture, the soft Egyptian cotton sheets on her parents' bed, suddenly felt different. Tainted. Not gifts of love, but purchases made with money her parents had come to expect, to count on, to plan around. She thought about the monthly transfer she'd set up 3 years ago. $10,000, automatically deposited into their account on the first of every month. It had started smaller, help with a medical bill here, assistance with property taxes there, but somehow it had grown, become routine, become expected. When had her parents stopped saying thank you? When had they stopped acknowledging that this money represented 40-plus hours of her week, every week? When had she become not Jessica their daughter, but Jessica their benefactor? The voices in the living room had moved on to other topics. Commentary on the party food, questions about various relatives. Jessica remained in the bedroom, staring at herself in the mirror above her parents' dresser. Same face she'd always had. Same determined jawline that had gotten her through countless late nights studying and early mornings at work. But the woman looking back at her felt like a stranger. She'd been so proud of her ability to help her parents. It had made her feel successful, valuable, needed. The monthly transfers had been a point of pride. Look how far she'd come from the scared college student who'd worked 3 part-time jobs to avoid asking her parents for money. Now she could give back, could ensure they never had to worry about finances again. But giving back implied gratitude from the recipient. What she'd just overheard sounded less like gratitude and more like expectation, entitlement, planning. Jessica forced herself to walk back to the living room, the glasses clutched in her sweaty palm. She handed them to her mother with what she hoped was a normal smile. "Thank you, sweetheart," Nancy said absently, already turning back to her conversation with Dorothy about paint colors and backsplash options. "Oh, Dorothy, you simply must see these samples. The contractor says he can start next month if we give him the go-ahead this week." "Next month?" Jessica heard herself say. "That's fast." Well, no point in waiting when you know what you want, Bill said, appearing at Nancy's elbow with a plate of appetizers. Besides, these contractors are booked out for months if you don't move quickly. $43,000. The number echoed in Jessica's mind. She made good money, excellent money by most standards. But $43,000 wasn't pocket change. It was a significant portion of her annual income, money she could put toward her own future, her own security, her own dreams. Dreams that had become increasingly unclear as more and more of her income flowed toward her parents' lifestyle upgrades. "Are you all right, dear?" Nancy's voice cut through Jessica's spiraling thoughts. "You look a bit pale." Jessica realized she'd been staring at the room around her, taking inventory of every expensive detail, every upgrade, every luxury that her monthly guilt money had purchased. The leather furniture, the artwork on the walls, the sound system playing soft jazz in the background. "I'm fine," she managed. "Just taking it all in. You've really transformed this place." "We have, haven't we?" Nancy's smile was radiant, proud. "It finally feels like the home we always dreamed of having. The home they'd always dreamed of having. Not the home they'd earned, not the home they'd saved for. The home they dreamed of having, funded by their daughter's sense of obligation and guilt." Jessica excused herself to the bathroom, needing a moment to breathe, to think, to process the shift that had just occurred in her understanding of her family dynamic. In the mirror above the sink, she looked at herself again. Same face, but now she saw something different. Not the successful daughter who'd made it big and could take care of her family. Not the generous child showing appreciation for her parents' sacrifices. She saw an ATM, a reliable source of funding for other people's dreams. The realization was devastating, not because it was entirely unexpected, but because somewhere deep down she'd known. The signs had been there, the casual way her father mentioned expensive purchases, the way her mother's requests had shifted from grateful asks to assumed approvals, the way neither of them ever asked about her life, her dreams, her own financial goals anymore. Conversations had become about their needs, their wants, their plans. When had she stopped being their daughter and become their financial planner? Jessica splashed cold water on her face and made a decision. She would finish the party, play her role as the dutiful daughter, and then she would go home and figure out what to do with this new understanding of her place in her family's life. She returned to the living room with a smile that felt like plastic, participating in conversations about the weather and family gossip while her mind raced. Every few minutes, her gaze would catch on another expensive detail: the custom window treatments, the designer coffee table, the imported tile in the entryway. Each item felt like evidence of her own naivete. "Jessica, honey," Nancy approached as the party was winding down. "Could you help me with something in the kitchen?" Jessica followed her mother, expecting to help with cleanup or leftover storage. Instead, Nancy produced a folder full of paint samples and contractor estimates. "I wanted to show you the kitchen plans before the other guests saw them," Nancy said, spreading the papers across the marble countertop. "The contractor says if we commit this week, he can start the demo next month. Isn't that exciting?" Jessica stared at the estimates. $43,000, just as she'd overheard. But seeing it in black and white, seeing the casual way her mother assumed her approval, made something inside her chest tighten. "Mom," she said carefully, "this is a lot of money." Nancy's expression flickered, just for a moment, before returning to its expectant brightness. "Well, yes, but it's worth it for quality work. And you know how much cooking means to me. Having a beautiful kitchen would it would make me so happy, Jessica." The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. Jessica's happiness should depend on her mother's happiness. Jessica's money should flow toward her mother's dreams. Jessica's success should serve her parents' comfort. "I need to think about it," Jessica said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. When was the last time she'd told her parents she needed to think about a financial request? Nancy's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Think about it, sweetheart. It's just a kitchen renovation. You spend more than that on your apartment rent every year." There it was, the assumption that Jessica's money was, fundamentally, family money. That her income was a shared resource rather than the product of her own labor, her own choices, her own life. I'd like to review the estimates myself, Jessica said, hating how her voice sounded apologetic. Make sure everything looks reasonable. Of course, Nancy said, though her tone suggested this was an unnecessary formality. But don't take too long, dear. Good contractors don't wait around forever. Jessica gathered her things and made her goodbyes, accepting hugs and compliments about the beautiful anniversary celebration. As she walked to her car, she could hear her parents already discussing timeline details with the contractor, their voices carrying the easy confidence of people who'd never doubted that the money would materialize. Sitting in her car in her parents' driveway, Jessica looked back at the house she'd helped transform. Warm light spilled from every window, showcasing the expensive renovations and elegant furnishings. It was beautiful, undeniably. Her parents deserved beautiful things. But as she started the engine and began the drive back to her downtown apartment, one question echoed in her mind. When had helping her parents become enabling them? And more importantly, when had she stopped being their daughter and become their financial plan? The Seattle skyline came into view as she crested the hill, the city lights reflecting her own emotional turbulence. She had decisions to make, difficult conversations to plan, and a relationship with the two most important people in her life to fundamentally reevaluate. For the first time in years, Jessica Williams felt truly alone with her success. And that realization was more devastating than any overheard conversation could ever be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The elevator doors closed with their familiar whisper, carrying Jessica up to her 23rd floor apartment as the Seattle skyline blurred past. Her hands still trembled as she fumbled with her keys, the sound of her parents' laughter echoing in her mind. Guilt money. The words had taken root in her chest, growing heavier with each passing moment. Her apartment welcomed her with its familiar, minimalist calm. Clean lines, neutral colors, expensive but understated furniture. Everything carefully chosen, nothing excessive. Such a contrast to the gaudy renovations she'd just left behind. Jessica dropped her purse on the granite kitchen counter and stared at the space around her. When had she become so careful with her own money while being so careless with theirs? She pulled her laptop from its dock, her fingers moving automatically to her banking app. The numbers appeared on screen with brutal clarity. 5 years of monthly transfers, each one $10,000 exactly. 60 payments, $600,000. The sum made her stomach lurch. But it was more than the total that disturbed her. It was the pattern. The escalation. The first transfer had been for $3,000, help with medical bills after her father's construction accident. By month 6, it had grown to $5,000 for quote-quote general expenses. By year 2, it had settled into its current rhythm of $10,000 monthly, as automatic as her own rent payment. Jessica scrolled through her photo gallery, pausing at images from family gatherings over the past few years. There was last Christmas, her parents beaming in front of their new stone fireplace. Her father's birthday in spring, the dining room showcasing its expensive chandelier. Her mother's retirement party, Nancy glowing with pride as she served guests in their transformed kitchen, the old kitchen, before tonight's $43,000 renovation request. In every photo, her parents looked prosperous, comfortable, proud. And in the background of each image, Jessica could now see the evidence of her financial contributions. The marble floors, the designer furniture, the custom window treatments. She'd thought she was helping them achieve security. Instead, she'd funded a lifestyle that had become their new normal. Her phone buzzed. Amanda Chen's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, how was the party?" Amanda's voice carried its usual warmth, but Jessica found herself unable to respond immediately. "Jess? You there?" "I'm here." Jessica's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "Amanda, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What's wrong? You sound awful?" "I was going to say shaken, but awful works too." Jessica moved to her couch, curling into its familiar embrace. When you cut off financial support to your family, how did you know it was the right thing to do? The silence stretched long enough that Jessica wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice gentle but firm. What happened tonight? The story spilled out in fragments. The overheard conversation, the casual entitlement, the guilt money comment that had shattered her understanding of their relationship. Amanda listened without interruption, making only small sounds of understanding and sympathy. $600,000, Jessica finished, the number hanging in the air between them. Jesus, Jess. I know it's a lot, but they're my parents. They sacrificed for my education, worked extra shifts so I could focus on studying instead of worrying about money. They deserve to be comfortable. They deserve to be comfortable, yes, but do they deserve to be entitled? The question hit like cold water. Jessica thought about her mother's casual assumption that the kitchen renovation was already approved, her father's proud discussion of contractor timelines as if the funding was guaranteed. When did they stop saying thank you? Amanda asked softly. Jessica tried to remember. The early transfers had come with tearful gratitude, with promises that it was temporary, with assurances that they'd pay her back someday. When had those promises stopped? When had the gratitude transformed into expectation? I don't remember, she admitted. I cut my family off 3 years ago, Amanda said. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My mother cried. My father raged. My siblings accused me of abandoning the family values they'd taught me. But you know what changed my mind? What? My nephew asked me why I looked so tired all the time. He was 8 years old, and he could see what the adults couldn't, or wouldn't, that I was exhausted from carrying everyone else's financial burdens while neglecting my own dreams. Jessica thought about her own dreams, so long deferred. The house she'd never bought because the down payment kept going to her parents' renovations. The vacation she'd never taken because that money had funded their new car. The retirement savings she'd neglected because her present income was so focused on their present comfort. What if they really need the money? She asked. Do they? From what you've described, they're not buying groceries or paying utilities. They're funding luxury renovations and designer furniture. Jessica looked around her own apartment. Nice, but modest compared to what her money had bought for her parents. She lived carefully, saved responsibly, avoided excessive spending. Meanwhile, her parents had grown comfortable with excess funded by her discipline. I feel like I'm being selfish, she whispered. Wanting to be valued for more than your earning potential isn't selfish, Jess. It's human. The words settled into Jessica's chest, competing with 32 years of conditioning that told her family came first, that success meant sharing, that love was measured in sacrifice. My parents raised me to believe that family takes care of family, she said. They did. But taking care doesn't mean enabling. And family means everyone, including you. After they hung up, Jessica sat in the darkness of her apartment, city lights casting patterns across her walls. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago. Ambitious, driven, excited about her growing success. That woman had seen her parents' financial struggles and wanted to help, wanted to share her good fortune. But somewhere along the way, helping had become habituation. Her parents had grown accustomed to her support, then comfortable with it, then dependent on it. And she had grown accustomed to being needed, to being valued for what she could provide rather than who she was. The realization was devastating. She had become complicit in her own devaluation. Jessica opened her laptop again, staring at the banking interface that had automated her generosity. $10,000, transferred monthly without question or condition. Money that had bought her parents' comfort and her own sense of purpose, but had somehow failed to purchase genuine appreciation or respect. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to approve the kitchen renovation, whether to continue funding her parents' lifestyle, or find the courage to challenge a dynamic that had slowly, subtly transformed from love into transaction. For the first time in 5 years, Jessica Williams faced the possibility that helping her family might require her to stop giving them money. The thought terrified her almost as much as the realization that she'd become someone they loved, not for who she was, but for what she could provide. The city hummed around her, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one navigating their own complex relationships with love, money, and family obligation. Jessica wondered how many of those lights belonged to people who, like her, had confused being needed with being loved. 3 days of sleepless nights had sharpened Jessica's resolve into something she barely recognized. She sat in her car outside her parents' house, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared at the home her money had transformed. The courage Amanda had helped her find felt fragile, like glass that might shatter with the wrong word or look. But she'd made the decision. Tonight, during their planned family dinner, she would finally speak the truth that had been building in her chest since the anniversary party. The front door opened before she could knock, Nancy's face lighting up with the familiar smile that used to warm Jessica's entire world. Now she searched that smile for genuine affection and found herself uncertain what she was looking at. "Jessica, honey! Perfect timing! I just pulled the roast from the oven." Nancy's enthusiasm seemed forced, brighter than usual. "And wait until you see what I've done with the dining room table settings. I used those new placemats we got last month, the ones from that boutique downtown." Jessica followed her mother inside, noting the casual mention of expensive purchases. The dining room had been set with china that Jessica didn't recognize, delicate porcelain with gold trim that belonged in a museum, not a suburban dinner table. "Those are beautiful," Jessica said carefully. "New?" "Oh, just a little splurge," Nancy waved dismissively. "I saw them at that antique shop on Pine Street and couldn't resist. They reminded me of the ones my grandmother had. You know? Family heirloom quality." Bill emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine, his face flushed with the satisfaction of a man who'd spent the afternoon in comfortable leisure. He'd aged well since retiring early. His construction-weathered hands were softer now. His permanent squint from years of outdoor work had relaxed into laugh lines. "There's my successful daughter," he said, wrapping Jessica in a hug that smelled of aftershave and red wine. "How's the tech world treating you? Still making that computer money?" The phrase grated against Jessica's nerves. Computer money. As if her decade of education, her years of building expertise, her 60-hour work weeks could be reduced to such casual dismissal. They settled around the table, the conversation flowing along familiar channels. Nancy discussed the neighbor's latest drama. Bill complained about the city's new parking regulations. Neither asked about Jessica's work, her life, her own challenges or dreams. The conversation existed in a bubble where Jessica was present, but not centered, valued, but not seen. Finally, as Nancy served dessert, an elaborate tiramisu that must have come from the expensive Italian bakery across town, Jessica found her opening. "Mom, about the kitchen renovation estimates you showed me." Nancy's face brightened immediately. "Oh, did you have a chance to review them? I know they might seem like a lot, but quality work costs money, and I really think—" "I can't approve the renovation," Jessica said quietly. The words landed in the dining room like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of silence that seemed to expand and contract around them. Nancy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Bill's wine glass stopped mid-lift. "Can't approve it?" Nancy's voice carried a note of confusion, as if Jessica had spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean, can't approve it?" Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs, but she pressed forward. "I mean, I won't be funding it. Not right now." "But—" Nancy set down her fork, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Honey, it's just a kitchen renovation. You know how much cooking means to me, and the current appliances are so outdated." "The appliances are 3 years old, Mom." "Well, yes, but compared to what's available now." $43,000 is a significant amount of money, Jessica interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "It's not something I can commit to casually." Bill leaned forward, his charming smile sliding into place. "Jessica, sweetheart, you're being overly cautious. You make excellent money, and it's not like you have a family of your own to support. Besides, think of it as an investment. Kitchen renovations add value to the property." There it was, the casual dismissal of her own financial needs, the assumption that her money existed primarily to serve their desires. Jessica felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. Dad, it's my money. The statement hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Nancy's eyes widened slightly, as if Jessica had committed some breach of family etiquette. Of course it's your money, dear, Nancy said carefully. But family helps family. That's how we raised you. Yes, you did raise me that way, Jessica agreed. But I overheard something at the anniversary party that's been bothering me. Both parents went very still. Bill's wine glass found the table with unusual precision. Nancy's hands folded in her lap, her expression already shifting into defensive preparation. I heard you telling Aunt Dorothy that I would pay for everything, Jessica continued. I heard you laugh about my guilt money. The silence stretched taut between them. Finally, Bill cleared his throat. Jessica, you're taking that out of context. We were just what? Just discussing how reliable your daughter's financial contributions are? Just planning expensive renovations around money you've never actually asked for? Nancy's defensive walls went up immediately. We've never forced you to help us. Every dollar you've given has been voluntary. Has it? Jessica challenged, because it feels like somewhere along the way voluntary became expected. When did you stop saying thank you? When did my help become your plan? That's not fair. Bill's voice carried a warning edge. We've sacrificed plenty for you over the years. All those extra shifts I worked to pay for your education. All the times your mother went without, so you could have what you needed. And there it was. The guilt weaponized. The past sacrifices transformed into present obligations. Jessica felt the familiar tug of family conditioning, the voices that had shaped her from childhood insisting that she owed them, that her success was somehow their property. But Amanda's words echoed in her memory. Taking care doesn't mean enabling. You did sacrifice for me, Jessica acknowledged. And I've been grateful. $600,000 grateful over the past 5 years. The number hit them like a physical blow. Nancy's face went pale. Bill's confident demeanor cracked slightly. I didn't realize you were keeping track, Nancy said quietly. I wasn't, until recently. But that's what it adds up to. $600,000. And instead of gratitude, I got casual assumptions about my guilt money. Jessica, please. Nancy's voice took on a pleading quality. You're our daughter. We love you. This feels like you're punishing us for accepting your generosity. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just reassessing what healthy family support looks like. Bill's face was reddening, his construction worker temper beginning to show. Reassessing? What's that supposed to mean? Jessica took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at the edge of a cliff. It means I'm temporarily suspending the monthly transfers. I need time to think about what kind of relationship we really have when money isn't automatically flowing from me to you. The explosion she expected didn't come. Instead, something worse happened. Her parents looked at her with a mixture of shock, hurt, and something that looked dangerously close to betrayal, as if she'd revealed herself to be someone they'd never known. I think, Jessica said quietly, standing from the table, I should go. She left them sitting in their beautifully renovated dining room, surrounded by the evidence of her financial generosity, facing for the first time the possibility that their daughter's success might not automatically translate into their comfort. Jessica's hands trembled as she tried to focus on the quarterly performance metrics displayed across her dual monitors. The numbers blurred together, meaningless against the chaos that had erupted in her family over the past week. Word of her decision had spread through the Williams family network with remarkable speed, carried by her parents' wounded phone calls to relatives who'd witnessed decades of family dynamics. The first call had come from her cousin Sarah, voice tight with disapproval. Jessica, what's this I hear about you cutting off Mom Nancy and Dad Bill? After everything they've done for you? Then Uncle Pete, gruff and direct. Your parents are devastated, kid. This isn't like you. Even her great-aunt Margaret, usually sweet and gentle, had left a voicemail that stung. Family takes care of family, dear. I hope you'll reconsider this harsh decision. Each conversation followed the same script. Shock, disappointment, and the implicit message that Jessica had somehow violated the fundamental laws of family loyalty. No one asked for her side of the story. No one questioned whether her parents' expectations might be unreasonable. The narrative had been set. Successful daughter abandons aging parents. Jessica, Marcus from IT, was standing beside her desk, holding a tablet and wearing an expression of professional concern. The Morrison account presentation is in 10 minutes. Are you ready? She blinked, realizing she'd been staring at her screen without seeing it for the past 20 minutes. Of course. I'll be right there. But as she gathered her materials, she caught the subtle exchange of glances between Marcus and Jennifer from marketing. The look that said they'd noticed her distraction, her unusual lack of focus. In a company culture that prized sharp performance and mental agility, appearing unfocused was dangerous. The presentation went poorly. Jessica stumbled over slides she could normally navigate in her sleep, lost her train of thought mid-sentence, and failed to answer a client question that should have been routine. By the time she returned to her desk, she could feel the weight of her colleague's concerned observation. Rough week? Amanda appeared at Jessica's cubicle, coffee in hand and worry in her eyes. You could say that. Jessica minimized the spreadsheet she'd been pretending to work on. My entire extended family has apparently decided I'm a heartless monster who's abandoned her poor, defenseless parents. Have you talked to Ryan yet? No, but I'm sure he'll... Jessica. Ryan's voice cut across the open office floor, carrying a note of barely controlled anger that made several heads turn. Her younger brother strode toward her desk with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested this confrontation had been building for days. Amanda stepped back tactfully, murmuring something about grabbing lunch, but Jessica could see her hovering nearby, close enough to intervene if necessary. We need to talk, Ryan said, his voice tight with frustration. Now. Jessica glanced around the office, aware of the curious stares and hushed conversations that had stopped mid-sentence. Ryan, this isn't the place. You made it the place when you decided to destroy our family. His voice rose slightly, drawing more attention. Mom's been crying for 3 days. Dad's talking about selling the house. And you're sitting here like nothing happened. The accusation hit like a slap. Jessica stood slowly, feeling the weight of every colleague's gaze, every whispered speculation about her personal drama playing out in their professional space. Conference room, she said quietly. 3 minutes. But Ryan wasn't finished with his public performance. 3 days, Jessica. They gave you everything, and you threw it back in their faces over what? Money? You make more in a month than most people see all year. Ryan. Her voice carried a warning note she rarely used with her younger brother. They sacrificed everything for us. Dad worked himself into the ground, Mom gave up her dreams, and this is how you repay them? By cutting them off when they finally have a chance to enjoy their lives? The familiar guilt washed over Jessica, accompanied by something new, a recognition of the manipulation tactics that had shaped their family dynamic. Ryan's words were almost identical to their parents' arguments, delivered with the same emotional pressure designed to override rational thought. Conference room, she repeated, walking away from her desk and trusting he would follow. The small meeting room offered little privacy. Glass walls meant their heated discussion would be visible to anyone passing by, but at least their voices wouldn't carry across the entire floor. You want to explain to me, Ryan began the moment the door closed, how you justify abandoning Mom and Dad. I didn't abandon anyone. I set a boundary. A boundary? Ryan's laugh was bitter. You call cutting off financial support a boundary? They're your parents, Jessica. They raised us, fed us, put you through college. Stop. Jessica's voice was sharper than she'd intended. Just stop with the guilt script. I've heard it from everyone else this week, and I'm tired of it. Ryan's face flushed. Guilt script? These are facts, Jessica. Mom and Dad are struggling now because of your decision. The kitchen renovation is canceled. They're talking about downsizing. Is that what you wanted? Something cold settled in Jessica's chest. The kitchen renovation was $43,000, Ryan. For appliances that are 3 years old. How is that struggling? It's not about the money. It's exactly about the money. It's about the fact that they planned expensive renovations around my income without asking me. It's about the fact that they referred to my financial support as, quote, guilt money at their anniversary party. Ryan's expression flickered, uncertainty creeping in for the first time. What are you talking about? I overheard them telling Aunt Dorothy that I would pay for everything. They laughed about my guilt money. That's what I am to them, Ryan. A source of funding for their lifestyle upgrades. That's not. Ryan started to protest, but his voice lacked conviction. When was the last time they asked about my life, my dreams, my own financial goals? When was the last time either of them showed interest in anything about me beyond my earning potential? The questions hung in the air between them. Jessica could see Ryan struggling, his certainty wavering as he confronted realities he'd never been forced to examine. You don't contribute anything, Jessica continued, her voice gaining strength. You've never been expected to help financially. Mom and Dad have never pressured you to give up your dreams or defer your goals for their comfort. Do you know how much I've given them over the past 5 years? Ryan shook his head. $600,000. The number hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale and he sank into one of the conference room chairs. 600, he whispered. 1,000. While I lived in the same apartment, drove the same car, and put off buying a house because my money was going to fund their renovations and luxury purchases. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, some of the anger had drained from his face, replaced by something that looked like dawning awareness. I didn't know, he said quietly. No one asked. Everyone just assumed that because I make good money, I should share it. No one questioned whether it was fair or sustainable or healthy. But there are parents. They are. And I love them. But love doesn't mean enabling a lifestyle they can't afford on their own. It doesn't mean being valued primarily for my bank account. Ryan left without another word, his shoulders heavy with the weight of realizations he wasn't ready to process. Jessica returned to her desk to find Amanda waiting with a concerned expression and a fresh cup of coffee. How bad was it? Amanda asked. He'll come around, Jessica said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Eventually. What she didn't say was how the confrontation had crystallized something important. She was prepared to be misunderstood, to be painted as the villain, to lose relationships if necessary. Because for the first time in years, she was choosing her own worth over her family's comfort. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. 2 weeks after the office confrontation, Jessica found herself accepting an invitation she would have declined just months earlier. Derek Johnson, the consultant who'd been working with their development team, had noticed her obvious distress and suggested coffee, not as a business meeting, but as one human being checking on another. You look like you haven't slept in days, Derek said, sliding a cappuccino across the small cafe table. His voice carried genuine concern rather than polite workplace courtesy. Jessica managed a tired smile. Family drama? It's complicated. It always is. Derek's understanding tone surprised her. Most people offered quick platitudes or changed the subject when family problems arose. My ex-wife used to say that the people who love us most are also the ones best positioned to hurt us. Something in his matter-of-fact delivery invited confidence. Jessica found herself sharing pieces of the story. The financial expectations, the overheard conversation, her family's reaction to her boundaries. Derek listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was genuinely engaged. 600,000, he repeated when she finished. That's not family support, that's funding someone else's retirement. The validation hit Jessica like warm sunlight after weeks of cold criticism from relatives. Meanwhile, across town, 17-year-old Ethan Williams was having his own uncomfortable realization. He'd been staying with his father Ryan more frequently since his parents' divorce, and he'd witnessed the family's recent upheaval with the keen observation that teenagers often brought to adult hypocrisy. Dad, Ethan said during dinner, why is everyone mad at Aunt Jessica? Ryan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. It's complicated, buddy. Grandma Nancy said Aunt Jessica abandoned them. But didn't she pay for their new kitchen and floors and stuff? Well, yes, but... And you never pay for anything for them, right? The question landed with uncomfortable precision. Ryan had never contributed financially to his parents' support, had never been expected to, had never even considered it his responsibility. That's different, Ryan said weakly. How? 2 months. That's how long it took for the fantasy to crumble. Jessica stared at her phone, Nancy's third voicemail of the day playing through the speaker with increasingly desperate undertones. The first had been casual. Just checking in. Hope you're doing well. Love you, honey. By the second, cracks had appeared in her mother's carefully maintained composure. The third was barely controlled panic. Jessica, sweetheart, I really need to talk to you. There's been a mix-up with the mortgage payment, and your father's been having some chest pains. Nothing serious, the doctor says, but we had to go to the emergency room, and you know how expensive that can be without proper insurance coverage. Could you call me back, please? The fake health scare was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetically manipulative. Jessica had learned to recognize her mother's tactics over the years, the strategic deployment of medical concerns whenever she needed something. The way Nancy's voice took on that particular trembling quality that had worked so effectively throughout Jessica's childhood. She deleted the voicemail without responding. The truth was, Jessica had been watching her parents' financial reality unfold through careful observation and Amanda's detective work. Her friend had connections throughout Seattle's real estate and banking networks, and the picture that emerged was both predictable and disturbing. Bill and Nancy Williams had spent the past 5 years living as if Jessica's monthly transfers were guaranteed income. They'd taken out a home equity loan against their renovated house. They'd purchased luxury items on credit cards, assuming future payments would cover the bills. Nancy had quit her part-time job at the department store, claiming she deserved to enjoy retirement. Bill had turned down several contracting opportunities, insisting he'd earned the right to be selective about work. Their monthly expenses had ballooned to nearly $12,000. Rent, utilities, credit card payments, car loans for vehicles they'd upgraded without consultation, insurance for a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford. Jessica's $10,000 monthly contribution had been supplemented by credit and the assumption that she would cover any shortfalls. Now, facing their first month without Jessica's automatic transfer, they were discovering what financial advisors call the lifestyle trap, when your standard of living exceeds your actual ability to pay for it. The doorbell in Jessica's apartment buzzed at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. She opened it to find her father standing in the hallway, holding a bouquet of grocery store flowers and wearing his most charming smile. The same smile that had convinced contractors to give him extensions, that had sweet-talked bank officers into favorable loan terms, that had made Jessica's childhood friends think he was the coolest dad in the neighborhood. Surprise! Bill's voice carried forced cheerfulness. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see my favorite daughter. Jessica stepped aside to let him in, noting how his eyes immediately swept her apartment, taking inventory, calculating value, assessing opportunity. The predatory evaluation of someone who'd come to ask for money. Dad, what's really going on? Bill settled into her couch with the casual familiarity of someone who'd never learned proper boundaries. Can't a father visit his daughter without an agenda? I've missed you, Jessica. This whole family drama has gotten out of hand. Has it? Your mother's been beside herself. She doesn't understand why you're punishing us like this. We raised you to be generous, to share your blessings with family. This coldness isn't like you. There it was. The gentle accusation wrapped in disappointment, designed to make Jessica feel guilty for maintaining boundaries. She recognized the pattern now, could see the manipulation tactics as clearly as if he'd outlined them in PowerPoint. I'm not being cold, Dad. I'm being clear. Bill's charm flickered, revealing something harder underneath. Clear about what? That you care more about money than family? That your success has made you forget where you came from? Clear that I won't be taken advantage of anymore. The words hung between them like a challenge. Bill's mask slipped further, showing the frustration that had been building for 2 months of financial reality. Taken advantage of? His voice rose. Jesus, Jessica, you sound like one of those self-help books your generation loves. We're your parents. Everything we did was for you and Ryan. The sacrifices we made, the opportunities we gave up. What opportunities, Dad? What exactly did you give up? The question caught him off guard. Bill's mouth opened and closed, searching for an answer that would support the narrative he'd constructed. I could have. There were jobs. Your mother had dreams. What dreams? What jobs? You worked construction until you got injured. Mom worked part-time retail until she decided she deserved to retire early on my income. Neither of you sacrificed careers for my education. You did what you could with what you had, just like millions of other parents. Bill's face was reddening, his construction worker temper finally breaking through the charm offensive. We don't deserve this disrespect. Not after everything we've done. What you've done, Jessica said quietly, is spend 5 years treating me like a personal bank account. You've planned expensive purchases around my income, referred to my financial support as guilt money, and built a lifestyle you can't actually afford. That's not. We never. Bill's protests were weak, unconvincing even to himself. The mortgage payment Nancy mentioned in her voicemail. You're behind because you took out a home equity loan assuming I'd cover the increased expenses. The emergency room visit was probably real, but the insurance concerns are manufactured because you've been putting off payments you thought I'd handle. Am I wrong? Bill's silence was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, Jessica continued, surprised by her own calm. You and Mom are going to figure out how to live within your actual means. That might mean downsizing the house, selling some of the expensive items you bought with my money, or finding ways to increase your income. But it's not going to mean resuming monthly transfers from me. Jessica. Bill's voice had lost all its charm, replaced by something that sounded like genuine fear. You're destroying your family over money. No, Dad. I'm saving myself from a relationship that was only about money. Bill left empty-handed, his flowers abandoned on Jessica's coffee table. As she watched him walk to the elevator, shoulders slumped in defeat, Jessica felt something she hadn't expected. Not guilt, but pity. Her parents had created a financial prison for themselves, and now they were discovering that the key they'd counted on, her automatic compliance, was no longer available. The realization should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the death of an illusion she hadn't realized she'd been clinging to. The hope that her parents' love for her was deeper than their need for her money. The call came on a Saturday morning while Jessica was finally allowing herself to sleep past 6 a.m. for the first time in months. Aunt Dorothy's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who'd spent decades managing family crises with the precision of a seasoned diplomat. Jessica, dear, I'm calling a family meeting, tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at my house. Everyone will be there. Aunt Dorothy? I don't think. This has gone on long enough. Dorothy's tone brooked no argument. Your parents are drowning. Ryan's been walking around like a ghost since your office confrontation. And you look like you haven't had a peaceful night's sleep in months. We're gonna sit down like adults and sort this mess out. What if I don't want to come? Then you'll disappoint me greatly. And I know you won't do that. Dorothy's voice softened slightly. Trust me, child. Sometimes families need outside intervention to remember how to love each other properly. The next afternoon, Jessica stood on Dorothy's front porch, noting how different this house felt from her parents' renovated showcase. Dorothy's home was comfortable but lived in, decorated with furniture that had been chosen for durability rather than impression. Everything spoke of a woman who understood the difference between having enough and having excess. Ryan's car was already in the driveway, along with her parents' sedan. The luxury model they'd purchased 18 months ago, with what Jessica now realized was the casual confidence of people who assumed someone else would cover the payments if necessary. Dorothy opened the door before Jessica could knock, her steel gray hair perfectly arranged, and her expression carrying the no-nonsense determination that had made her successful in business and formidable in family disputes. Punctual as always, Dorothy said, ushering Jessica into the living room where the rest of the family sat in uncomfortable silence. Bill and Nancy occupied the couch, their body language defensive and wounded. Nancy's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual careful makeup unable to hide the stress of the past few months. Bill looked older than Jessica remembered, his face carrying lines that spoke of sleepless nights and financial anxiety. Ryan sat in the armchair across from them, his 17-year-old son Ethan beside him on a small ottoman. The teenager's presence surprised Jessica. Family meetings in the Williams household had traditionally been adults-only affairs. "I asked Ethan to join us," Dorothy said, noting Jessica's questioning look. "Sometimes it takes the youngest person in the room to see what the adults have chosen to ignore." Dorothy took her place in the central chair, the natural position of someone accustomed to leading difficult conversations. She looked around the room with the measured gaze of a judge preparing to deliver verdict. "We're here because this family is tearing itself apart over money," she began without preamble. "And before anyone starts defending their position or explaining why they're right and everyone else is wrong, you're going to listen to what I have to say." Nancy shifted uncomfortably. "Dorothy, I don't think it's appropriate for you to—" "Nancy," Dorothy's voice cut through the protest like a blade. "You will listen." The room fell silent. "I've watched this family for 5 years," Dorothy continued. "I've watched my brother and his wife transform from people who were grateful for help into people who expected it. I've watched Jessica give and give until she forgot she had the right to say no. And I've watched Ryan avoid any responsibility while his sister sacrificed her own dreams for your comfort." Bill started to object, but Dorothy held up a hand. "I'm not finished. Bill, do you remember when you first got injured? When Jessica started helping with medical bills? You cried when she offered that first $3,000? You promised it was temporary, that you'd pay her back as soon as you could work again." Bill's face flushed, but he remained silent. "Nancy, do you remember thanking Jessica for the kitchen appliances? For the hardwood floors? For the marble countertops? Because I do. You were so grateful, so amazed that your daughter had become successful enough to help transform your home." Nancy's hands twisted in her lap. But somewhere along the way, gratitude became expectation. Jessica's generosity became your financial plan. Her success became your retirement fund. Dorothy's voice remained steady, but her words carried the weight of accumulated observation. And when she finally said enough, you made her feel guilty for setting boundaries. "We never asked her to give us anything," Nancy said weakly. "Didn't you?" Ethan spoke for the first time, his teenage voice cutting through the adult rationalizations. "Grandma, every time I come over, you and Grandpa talk about what Aunt Jessica's gonna pay for next. The new car, the vacation you want to take, the deck renovation. You plan your spending around her money." Ryan looked at his son with surprise and something that might have been pride. "Ethan." "No, Dad, someone needs to say it." Ethan turned to face his grandparents. "You never ask me or Dad for money. You never expect us to pay for your stuff. But you talk about Aunt Jessica like she's your personal bank account." The truth hit the room like cold water. Nancy's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in months, they looked like tears of shame rather than manipulation. "I raised you both to believe that family takes care of family," Dorothy said, her voice gentler now. "But I failed to teach you that taking care goes both ways." "Bill, when did you stop looking for work?" "Nancy, when did you decide you were too good for part-time employment?" "When did you decide that Jessica's hard work gave you the right to comfortable retirement?" "We're not young anymore," Bill said, his voice barely audible. "Construction destroyed my back. Nancy's been on her feet in retail for decades. We thought if our daughter was successful, maybe we could finally rest." "There's nothing wrong with wanting to rest," Dorothy replied, "but there's everything wrong with making your daughter's financial support the foundation of your comfort without considering the cost to her." Jessica found her voice for the first time since entering the room. "The cost wasn't just money. It was my sense of self-worth. It was feeling like you valued what I could provide more than who I am." The words hung in the air, honest and devastating. Ryan cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology, Jessica, a big one. I never realized. I never questioned why you were expected to carry all the financial responsibility while I was free to figure out my career. I benefited from a system that was unfair to you, and I defended it because it was comfortable for me." Nancy broke down completely then, her careful composure cracking as the full weight of their behavior became undeniable. "We love you, Jessica. We do. But somewhere along the way, we started loving what you could do for us more than just you." Bill nodded, his own eyes wet. We got comfortable. We got entitled. We forgot that your money represents your time, your work, your sacrifice. Dorothy leaned forward, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd built her own success through discipline and self-reliance. Love isn't what you can extract from someone, it's what you can give without keeping score. Jessica has been giving for 5 years. The question now is whether the rest of you are ready to learn how to give back. What do we do? Nancy asked, her voice small and broken. How do we fix this? You start, Dorothy said firmly, by taking responsibility for your own lives. You find work, you downsize your expenses, you live within your means. You stop treating Jessica like your retirement plan and start treating her like your daughter. And Jessica, Dorothy turned to her niece, you keep your boundaries. You've learned to say no, which is one of the hardest lessons an adult can master. Don't let guilt convince you to go backward. Ethan spoke again, his young voice carrying an insight that shamed the adults in the room. Maybe if everyone contributed what they could instead of expecting one person to pay for everything, we could actually be a family again. The meeting ended with tentative hugs and promises to do better. As Jessica drove home, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not the naive hope that everything would return to how it was before, but the mature hope that her family might finally learn to love her for who she was, rather than what she could provide. Change would be slow, painful, and incomplete. But for the first time since the anniversary party, Jessica believed it might be possible. 3 weeks after Dorothy's intervention, Jessica received a text that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Got a job at Home Depot. Start Monday. Wish me luck. Dad. The message arrived while she was having dinner with Derek at their favorite Thai restaurant, their relationship having evolved from supportive friendship into something deeper and more promising. Derek noticed her surprise as she stared at her phone. Good news or bad news? He asked, setting down his chopsticks. Confusing news, Jessica replied, showing him the screen. My father just got his first job in 3 years. That's progress, right? I think so, I'm just not sure I trust it yet. Her skepticism wasn't entirely unfounded. The first weeks after the family meeting had been marked by what Amanda called performative change. Grand gestures designed to convince Jessica to resume financial support rather than genuine efforts at self-sufficiency. Bill had applied to exactly 3 jobs, all of which he'd found reasons to turn down. Nancy had talked extensively about returning to work, while taking no concrete steps to actually do so. But something had shifted in the past week. Maybe it was the reality of their dwindling savings account, or perhaps Dorothy's follow-up conversations had finally penetrated their defensive rationalizations. Whatever the catalyst, both of Jessica's parents seemed to be making genuine efforts to rebuild their lives on their own terms. The proof came in unexpected moments. Nancy had called the previous Thursday, not to ask for money or manipulate through manufactured crises, but to share genuine excitement about a part-time position she'd found at a local bookstore. Her voice carried a lightness Jessica hadn't heard in years, the satisfaction of someone who'd remembered what it felt like to be valued for her skills rather than her family connections. The pay isn't much, Nancy had admitted, but the work is interesting, and I forgot how good it feels to have somewhere to go every day. To feel useful. Even more surprising was the shift in Ryan's behavior. Her younger brother had begun making regular visits to their parents, not to mediate or cajole Jessica into resuming support, but to help with practical matters he'd previously ignored. He'd helped Bill craft a resume, drawing on his graphic design skills to create something professional and appealing. He'd researched job opportunities, made networking connections, and, most significantly, had set up his own modest monthly contribution to their parents' household expenses. It's not much, Ryan had told Jessica during their first real conversation in months. Only $500 a month. But it's something I can afford consistently. And it feels right. Like I'm finally acting like an adult son instead of a perpetual younger brother who gets a free pass on everything. The change in family dynamics was most evident during their first post-intervention gathering, a casual Sunday dinner at Dorothy's house that felt remarkably different from previous family events. For the first time in years, conversations didn't revolve around Jessica's career success or her parents' latest desires for home improvements. Instead, they talked about Nancy's amusing customers at the bookstore, Bill's adjustment to retail work after decades of construction, and Ryan's latest freelance projects. Jessica found herself relaxing in ways she'd forgotten were possible during family gatherings. She wasn't being evaluated for her potential financial contributions or subjected to carefully crafted requests disguised as casual conversation. She was simply Jessica, daughter, sister, person with her own interests and challenges. The most profound change came from an unexpected source: her parents' relationship with each other. Freed from the comfortable assumption that Jessica would handle their financial shortfalls, Bill and Nancy had been forced to communicate honestly about their situation for the first time in years. The conversations hadn't been easy, but they'd resulted in a level of partnership Jessica had rarely witnessed between them. "We're selling the house," Nancy announced over dessert, her voice carrying determination rather than defeat. "We found a lovely townhouse about 15 minutes away. Smaller, but much more manageable on our actual income." Jessica felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that her parents were making responsible choices, sadness that the beautiful home she'd helped fund would be lost, and something that might have been pride in their newfound maturity. "The realtor thinks we'll get enough from the sale to pay off the home equity loan and have a small emergency fund left over," Bill added. "It feels good to be planning within our means again instead of always hoping for external solutions." But the most significant development was happening in Jessica's own life. Freed from the constant anxiety about her family's financial demands, she'd begun to remember her own dreams and ambitions. The house she'd been wanting to buy for years was suddenly back on the table. The vacation to Japan she'd postponed indefinitely was now being actively planned. Most importantly, her relationship with Derek was deepening without the shadow of family drama and financial obligation. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Jessica confided to Amanda during one of their regular coffee meetings. "For my parents to revert to their old patterns, or for this to all be an elaborate manipulation to get me to resume the monthly transfers." "What would you do if that happened?" Amanda asked. "Maintain my boundaries," Jessica replied without hesitation. "I've learned that I can't control their choices, only my response to them." The test came sooner than expected. Bill was laid off from Home Depot after 6 weeks, a casualty of seasonal staff reductions rather than performance issues. The old Jessica would have immediately worried about her parents' financial stability and begun calculating how much emergency assistance they might need. The new Jessica waited to see how they would handle the setback. The answer came in the form of action, rather than requests for help. Bill immediately began applying for other positions, drawing on the job search skills he'd developed during his first employment effort. Nancy picked up additional shifts at the bookstore. Ryan increased his monthly contribution temporarily to help bridge the gap. Most importantly, neither parent called Jessica to report the crisis or hint at their need for assistance. When Jessica learned about the situation through Ryan rather than her parents directly, she felt a complicated mixture of emotions. There was concern for their welfare, certainly, but also something she'd never experienced before in relation to her family's financial struggles: confidence in their ability to handle it themselves. She called her father that evening, not to offer money, but to offer emotional support. "I heard about the job situation," she said. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," Bill replied, his voice carrying a strength she hadn't heard in years. "It's frustrating, but it's not the end of the world. I've got applications out at 4 other places, and Ryan's helping me look into some contracting opportunities that might work better with my back problems." "I'm proud of you, Dad." The words surprised them both. Bill was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Jessica, for everything. For cutting us off when we needed it, for forcing us to remember how to take care of ourselves. I know it wasn't easy for you." "It wasn't," Jessica agreed, "but it was necessary." As she hung up the phone, Jessica realized that for the first time in years, she felt genuinely hopeful about her family's future. Not because their problems were solved, but because they were finally taking responsibility for solving them themselves. The dynamic that had nearly destroyed their relationships was being replaced by something healthier, more sustainable, and more genuinely loving. Change was indeed possible, but only when people were brave enough to demand it from themselves and those they loved. 6 months after Dorothy's intervention, the phone call Jessica had been dreading finally came. But it wasn't from her parents. It was from Ryan, his voice tight with worry. "Dad's been laid off again," he said without preamble. The contracting company lost their biggest client. He's been out of work for 2 weeks. Jessica's first instinct was familiar and immediate. Calculate how much emergency assistance they might need, consider which of her savings accounts could cover their mortgage, begin the mental gymnastics of financial rescue, but she caught herself, recognizing the old patterns that had nearly destroyed their family. "How are they handling it?" she asked instead. "Better than I expected, honestly. Mom picked up extra shifts at the bookstore. Dad's already got 3 job interviews lined up." "But Jessica?" Ryan's voice wavered. "They're scared, really scared. And they haven't asked me for help, which makes me think they're trying really hard not to ask you either." That evening, Derek found Jessica staring out the window of her apartment, her engagement ring catching the city lights. He'd proposed just 2 weeks earlier, a quiet, perfect moment that had felt like the natural progression of a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "You're worried about them," he said, settling beside her on the couch. "I am, but not in the way I used to be." Jessica turned the ring on her finger, still adjusting to its presence. "Before, I would have been worried about how to fix their problem. Now I'm worried about whether they'll be able to fix it themselves." "That's growth," Derek said gently. "Trusting the people you love to handle their own challenges." The test of her family's transformation came 3 days later. Jessica had expected a carefully crafted call from her mother, employing the subtle manipulation tactics that had worked so effectively in the past. Instead, she received a text from her father. "Tough week, but we're managing. Hope you're well. Love you." No request for help. No detailed explanation of their financial struggles designed to inspire guilt. No mention of bills or deadlines or emergency expenses. Just a simple acknowledgement of difficulty and an expression of love that asked for nothing in return. Jessica stared at the message for a long time, feeling something she'd never experienced in relation to her family's crises: pride in their resilience rather than pressure to provide solutions. She called her mother that evening. "Dad told me about the job situation," Jessica said. "How are you both doing?" "Honestly, we're scared," Nancy admitted, her voice carrying a vulnerability that felt genuine rather than manipulative. "But we're also proud of ourselves? Does that sound strange? We're handling this crisis as a family instead of immediately looking for someone else to solve it for us." "It doesn't sound strange at all, Mom. It sounds healthy. Your father found a part-time position at a hardware store. It's not ideal, but it's something while he looks for full-time work. And I'm learning that I actually enjoy working more hours at the bookstore. The customers have become like friends, and there's something satisfying about earning our way through this instead of depending on me," Jessica finished. "Yes, I'm sorry it took us so long to understand what we were doing to you." The conversation lasted an hour, the longest Jessica had spoken with her mother in years, without money being mentioned even once. They talked about Nancy's work, about Jessica's engagement, about plans for a small wedding celebration that would include the whole family without financial expectations or obligations. When Derek proposed a toast that night to celebrate their engagement properly, Jessica found herself thinking about the difference between the family she'd grown up with and the one that seemed to be emerging from the ruins of their financial codependency. "To new beginnings," Derek said, raising his wine glass. "To all of us learning what love actually looks like," Jessica replied, meaning every word. 1 year after the anniversary party that changed everything, Jessica stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the simple pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's. Today was her wedding day, and for the first time in years, a major family celebration filled her with anticipation rather than anxiety. The morning had begun with a text from her father, not asking for anything, not hinting at expenses, just a simple message that brought tears to her eyes. "So proud of the woman you've become. Can't wait to walk you down the aisle. Love, Dad." The transformation in her family's communication still surprised her sometimes. Where once every interaction had carried the undercurrent of financial expectation, Now their conversations flowed with the natural rhythm of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Amanda arrived with coffee and the careful eye of someone who'd witnessed Jessica's entire journey from financial enabler to confident woman setting boundaries. "You look radiant," she said, settling into the bedroom chair that had become her designated spot during their countless conversations about family dysfunction and healing. "I feel different," Jessica admitted, smoothing her dress, elegant but not extravagant, purchased without the shadow of family financial obligations hanging over every decision. "Like I'm finally marrying Derek as myself, not as someone carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations." The previous evening's rehearsal dinner had been a revelation. Held at Derek's favorite restaurant, it had been a celebration funded by the couple themselves, with family members contributing what they could afford rather than looking to Jessica as the automatic source of payment. Ryan had insisted on paying for the flowers. Nancy had made the centerpieces by hand, her artistic skills finally channeled into contribution rather than consumption. Bill had researched wine pairings and negotiated with the restaurant for a reasonable price. Most significantly, no one had expected Jessica to handle the details, costs, or coordination. She had been allowed to be simply the bride, excited, nervous, focused on marrying the man she loved rather than managing everyone else's comfort and expectations. Derek's family had been watching these dynamics with interest. His parents, married 38 years with their own history of financial struggles and triumphs, had quietly observed the way Jessica's family interacted. During the rehearsal dinner, Derek's mother had pulled Jessica aside. "I don't know the whole story," she'd said gently, "but I can see that your family has learned something important about love and respect. That's a gift, both to themselves and to you." Now, as Jessica prepared for her wedding ceremony, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. The woman who had discovered her parents calling her financial support guilt money felt like a different person entirely, someone who had been willing to accept being valued primarily for her earning potential rather than her inherent worth. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. There had been backsliding, moments of manipulation, tests of resolve that left Jessica questioning whether she was being too harsh or her family was being genuine in their efforts to change. But gradually, month by month, a new dynamic had emerged, one built on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and love that didn't require financial transaction to prove itself. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Amanda or perhaps her mother with some last-minute wedding detail. Instead, Ryan appeared in the doorway, looking unexpectedly emotional. Her younger brother had grown up considerably over the past year, taking on responsibilities he'd avoided for decades and learning to see Jessica as a person rather than a solution to family problems. "I wanted to talk to you before the ceremony," he said, settling on the edge of her bed. "To say some things I should have said a long time ago." Jessica turned from the mirror, noting how different Ryan looked. Older, more serious, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had finally learned to be accountable for his own choices. "Jess, I spent 34 years thinking that being the favorite child meant I was exempt from family responsibility. I watched you carry burdens that should have been shared, celebrated your success while benefiting from your sense of obligation, and defended a system that was fundamentally unfair because it was comfortable for me." His voice carried the weight of genuine remorse, not the performative guilt that had characterized so many family conversations in the past. "When Ethan asked me why I never contributed anything while expecting you to pay for everything, I realized I'd been living like a perpetual teenager, assuming someone else would handle the adult responsibilities. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to my own son, who was watching me model selfishness and entitlement." Jessica felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Ryan, let me finish," he said gently. "This year has taught me what it means to be an adult son and brother, contributing to mom and dad's expenses, helping with practical problems, being present for family difficulties without immediately looking for someone else to solve them. It feels good, Jess. It feels like I'm finally pulling my weight instead of riding on your success." He stood and moved to her dresser, picking up a small wrapped box she hadn't noticed before. "This is my wedding gift to you, but it's also an apology and a promise." Jessica opened the box to find a simple silver bracelet engraved with words that made her eyes fill with tears. To my sister, who taught our family what love actually looks like. I promise, Ryan continued, that I will never again expect you to be the family's financial solution. I promise to contribute what I can, to help carry the emotional and practical burdens, and to make sure Ethan grows up understanding that family responsibility is shared by everyone, not just the person who makes the most money. They hugged then, the kind of embrace that acknowledged pain and forgiveness simultaneously. When they separated, Jessica felt lighter, as if a weight she'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. Another knock brought Nancy into the room, looking elegant in the dress she'd chosen carefully within her bookstore's salary budget. The mother who had once planned expensive renovations around Jessica's income now carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who understood the difference between wanting and needing, between being supported and being enabled. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Nancy said, her voice carrying genuine warmth rather than the calculated sweetness that had masked manipulation in the past. "Are you ready?" "I think so," Jessica replied, meaning it in ways that extended far beyond the wedding ceremony. The service itself was small and perfect. 35 people, who genuinely cared about Jessica and Derek, gathered in the garden of a local venue that reflected their tastes, rather than anyone else's expectations of what a wedding should cost or look like. Jessica had paid for what she wanted, Derek had contributed equally, and family members had offered help that was accepted gracefully rather than expected automatically. When Bill walked her down the aisle, his construction-weathered hand steady on her arm, Jessica saw pride in his eyes that had nothing to do with her earning potential and everything to do with the woman she'd become. The father, who had once visited her apartment, hoping to charm money out of her, now beamed with genuine happiness for her future. During the ceremony, as she and Derek exchanged vows they'd written themselves, Jessica found herself thinking about the difference between the wedding she might have planned a year ago, elaborate, expensive, funded by her guilt and family pressure, and the celebration happening now. This wedding reflected their actual values, their real relationship, their authentic selves, rather than performances designed to meet others' expectations. The reception was held in the same garden, with dancing on a small wooden platform and dinner served family style at round tables. Dorothy, magnificent in purple silk, served as unofficial master of ceremonies, her toast bringing tears to many eyes. "A year ago," Dorothy said, raising her glass of champagne, "this family was in crisis. Not because of any external tragedy, but because we had forgotten how to love each other without keeping score." Jessica had the courage to say, "Enough," to demand that love be based on respect rather than transaction, on genuine affection rather than financial obligation. Today we celebrate not just her marriage to Derek, but the healing of relationships that nearly broke under the weight of misplaced expectations. She turned to face Jessica directly. "You taught us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction. Thank you for caring enough about this family to force us to become better versions of ourselves." Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Jessica found herself sitting with her parents at one of the round tables, watching Derek dance with his young niece while Ryan and Ethan helped stack chairs and clean up without being asked. "I have something to tell you," Nancy said quietly, her voice carrying nervous excitement. "Your father and I have been saving money from our jobs. Not much, but something each month. We want to establish a small emergency fund so that if something happens, job loss, medical bills, car trouble, we can handle it ourselves. We also," Bill added, "want to start contributing to a fund for Ethan's college expenses. Not much, maybe $50 a month, but something that shows him education is a family priority, without expecting you to be the only one investing in the next generation." Jessica felt a swell of pride and love that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with watching people she cared about grow into better versions of themselves. "I'm proud of you both," she said, meaning it completely. "This year has been hard, but look what you've accomplished. You're supporting yourselves, contributing to the family in meaningful ways, and showing Ethan what responsible adulthood looks like." As the night ended and Jessica and Derek prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a modest trip to the Pacific coast that they'd planned and funded together, She realized that she felt something she hadn't experienced during family gatherings in years: uncomplicated happiness. The wedding wasn't just the beginning of her marriage to Derek. It was the celebration of a family that had learned to love without exploitation, to support without enabling, and to respect each member's individual worth rather than their financial utility. Standing in her hotel room later that night, still in her wedding dress, Jessica looked at her reflection and saw someone she barely recognized from a year ago. Gone was the woman who measured her worth by her ability to solve other people's problems. In her place stood someone who understood that love, real love, didn't require constant financial proof, and that the healthiest families were built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. The bracelet Ryan had given her caught the light as she raised her hand to remove her veil. To my sister, who taught our family what love actually looks like. For the first time in her adult life, Jessica Williams Johnson felt truly free to love and be loved in return. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.